Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be going over one of the builds that I've been testing out for the 3.15 League Start. Of course, it's not refined and still subject to change, but with the Manifesto release, I feel like this is probably going to be a pretty good choice for League Start. So of course, patch notes aren't out yet. This could get absolutely decimated, so be warned. But overall, I think it'd be good to get some content out now so you guys can start thinking about League Start builds. So the build that I've been testing out is a Soulwrest Necromancer, which is incredibly fun to play when you have it set up correctly. You can see here, we're in the background doing Uber Elder in day 1 gear, simulating the 3.15 nerfs. To simulate these nerfs, I've basically running this on a 5-link with no damage flasks. You can see I am using a few defensive flasks. Overall, that is a mistake on my part, sorry about that. In the end, we won't have stuff like Basalt, and Quicksilver is nerfed, etc. But the main primary thing that we need to worry about is the damage here. And overall, the damage is very, very good. You can see here that we're pretty much shredding Urelda, and this is again a day 1 budget, which is very, very good. And we'll get into the items in just a few minutes here, but overall, it's a fairly affordable build. Cool. All right, so Summoner. Why did I pick a Summoner again? Well, this one's a little bit different. So with the new sweeping changes to crit, to all the support gems and pretty much everything, I really wanted a comfort pick. And when I think comfort, I think totems and minions, because you're afforded an incredible amount of flexibility with your bossing, and you're also afforded an incredible amount of range and safety. So overall, when you're playing a totem build, you can basically just run around the arena placing totems behind you, and this build plays very, very similarly to that. Now, one of the big downsides of minion builds though is that they can die. This build actually pretty much mitigates that completely and also offsets the future 25% less minion life nerf coming in the 3.15 expansion, which is actually a pretty big deal because it means that you get a little bit of damage as compensation, as that's the nerf they decided to go with for minions. Pretty nice. So yeah, we get a pretty smooth Uber Elder kill here. Overall, the damage is focused around a brand playstyle, believe it or not. It plays very, very similarly to an Armageddon brand build, with a bit of minion kind of mechanics thrown in the mapping scenario. But overall, when you're actually playing bosses, it does play very, very much like brands. You're targeting bosses, you're putting brands on there. You see I rip here at the end, right at the end. But for the most part, that was a deathless kill. But yeah, it's a very, very simple and easy play style, and in maps it plays fairly similarly, with the need to convocate sometimes, which is essentially the teleport that moves all your minions with you. Alright, let's take a little bit of a look at some mapping footage though, because a League Starter, while it might be good at bossing, which this build very much is, it's very much a bossing kind of build, it also needs to be able to clear maps effectively if it wants to have access to stuff like invitation farming at a reasonable rate. Invitation farming is one of the most lucrative things you can do early and also late game, late league, so I really wanted my character to be able to do it. So I needed a build which is going to be very, very good at map farming. So you can see here in the background, we do have a bit of a ramp up time. That is in order to get the 20 phantasms as part of the Soulwrest staff going. I'm going to go into that pretty heavily in detail in just a minute here, but I do want to draw attention to how quickly the build moves. That's somewhat in part to unnerfed dash being part of the build, as well as Quicksilver, but overall it is still going to be an incredibly fast build after the nerfs. I think we're going to probably take around a 30% movement speed nerf, and of course dash might need to be substituted for flame dash, because I'm certainly not going to be able to be dashing this much in the new expansion, which is, a little bit unfortunate. But the cool thing about Necromancer is, and this build, is that you're permanently affected by Flesh Offering, which gives you a ton of cast and movement speed, which is super duper awesome. And I'm a big fan of that, of course. So you will be moving pretty zoomy, and you do have a fairly good arsenal of projectiles coming out every few seconds from your minions. And if you're feeling a little bit sluggish on a pack, you can of course convocate as well. But you can see it's this run and gun brand kind of playstyle here, and you pretty much always want to be branding every single pack to maintain a good amount of Flesh Offering duration, as well as your army of phantasms, which we'll get into in a minute here. But yeah, the playstyle is pretty nice, and I'll go into how you get a big single target burst. Soulwrest and why this build is so powerful in terms of the single target, because you actually utilize a weapon swap. Now, this weapon swap can be a little bit on the expensive side. I'm not entirely sure. We'll get into that in a minute here. But you essentially use 2 Soulwrest staffs, one with a single target and one with an AoE setup, and it lets you swap on the fly to a massive single target setup, which is able to take down Shaper and Uber Elder and stuff like that. But you're also able to swap to a speed mapping setup, all with the press of 1 key, and no gem swaps involved. So if you played my Freezing Pulse Ice Spear totem before, well, you'll know that this build is actually going to be better. I do go on to show another map here, but I really want to dive into the nitty-gritty of the build now. But we show an open layout, which probably looks a little bit better on the build, but you know, it is what it is. It's a fairly nice play style. All right, I know I'm probably selling this build too hard, but we'll see what the patch notes say. It's very possible that this build gets nerfed, but it is a fairly good looking one to begin with. All right, let's get into the actual build itself. So overall, you'll notice that I do have an arsenal of minions here at my disposal. We're going to go through the role that each of them serve, and then how that applies to the Phantasms. So we'll start off with the Phantasms though. So the Phantasms is actually a support gem, believe it or not. Summon Phantasm is indeed the support gem here. So it says essentially that you have a chance of summoning a Phantasm when the primary skill basically hits or slays an enemy. Slays an enemy is 70% chance, and for hitting an enemy it's 10% chance, which essentially is going to give you a permanent uptime on 11 Phantasms of the support gem. But the cool thing about Soulwrest is it also has inbuilt Phantasm, which essentially doubles the amount of Phantasms you have at your disposal. So you can see here, trigger level 20 Phantasm skill when you consume a corpse. So basically, the way we get the corpses and the consumption is by having Desecrate and Flesh Offering. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like here. So if you Desecrate, we're getting a bit of lag here, that's unfortunate. And then you consume those corpses. For every corpse consumed, you will create a Phantasm. You can see here I consumed 5 corpses, I got 5 Phantasms. Now, you could, in theory, run around desecrating and, using Flesh Offering, but in reality, it's much better and creates a much more fluid gameplay style if you use an Arcanist brand, which is very potent. So the Arcanist brand is going to essentially automatically trigger Desecrate and Flesh Offering over and over again, creating you your army of Phantasms. Now this is very consistent on bosses, but does have some downtime in maps, because if enemies with your brand on them die too quickly to your zombies or your carrion golems or other stuff, well then you won't have your Flesh Offering trigger as fast as you want to. So you really do need to spam your Arcanist brand sometimes in maps. Overall, it is a fairly smooth gameplay style though, and if you do keep your brands up enough, you will maintain a full army of 21 Phantasms permanently, which is very strong. Now another cool thing is that these Phantasms, with the addition of a Cluster Jewel, are actually pretty much immune to damage, making them sort of like a ton of pseudo Herald of Agonies. That's kind of how it feels to play. There's never really a time in which you don't have 21 of them, even on big endgame boss fights. And that is due to the Cluster Jewel Blessed Rebirth. Minions created recently cannot be damaged. That's in the first 4 seconds. And on big boss fights where they're most prone to die, you're pretty much going to be spamming these things out constantly with Arcanist brand, which is really nice. And it's going to be basically permanently on the boss, and it's going to be a really good time all around. So you're going to have an immortal army of these Phantasms, which is really awesome. And what is really cool as well is that lets us leverage Call to Slaughter, which essentially gives them a ton of movement speed and attack and cast speed, because they're constantly being created over and over again, which is pretty awesome. In addition to that, we can also leverage Life from Death, which essentially means all of the other minions we have, the supporting minions, gain 4% of their life whenever a minion dies. Now, whenever you basically cast a new Flesh Offering, which is 5 minions getting created, 5 of them will probably be dying as well, because they get timed out, because you can't only have 21 of them, or 20 with a 20 gem. But that's basically going to heal all of your minions for 20% of their maximum life. So your zombies, specters, and stuff like that are going to be able to more easily sustain their life in big boss fights, and you will very rarely lose a lot of your support minions, which is one of the annoying things about playing a Necromancer, but this build solves that fairly easily, which is very cool, and it definitely feels a lot better to play this build than a Carrion Golem build, for example. So pretty awesome there, and that's going to basically make your Spectre army pretty much immortal, which is awesome. Sorry, not Spectre, Phantasm, which is pretty nice. As for the actual other minions here, we have zombies purely from the point of view that they apply Feeding Frenzy, as well as Elemental Army, which gives us Elemental Penetration. Those are the main two things we need here from zombies, and it's pretty much the only reason that you run them. Basically overall, that's all there is to it. Skitterbots are there for the shock, which is a more multiplier overall for your whole army, and also to apply Bone Chill, which is going to give us a more damage multiplier for our cold damage, of which our minions deal 100% cold damage, which is super duper awesome as well, which is pretty good. A lot of our damage is, of course, from auras. Zealotry and Hatred play a big role in our damage, and those are juiced up by the Victario's Influence Lacquered Garb here, which is an incredible, common, and easy item to acquire, and we have it on a 5-link here to acquire Culling Strike on our Summonarian Golem, which is giving us further physical damage here, which is converted by our gloves, Triad Grip with 4 green sockets, into 100% cold damage, which again synergizes very well with Elemental Army from the zombies with penetration, and also very, very well with clearing maps because you get Shatter, but also it does allow us to go Elemental Equilibrium, one of the biggest multipliers that Necromancer has available to it. Now, using Elemental Equilibrium combined with Arcanist Brand Ball Lightning, which is again on our Arcanist Brand constantly casting, as well as Avatar of Fire, you're able to expose the enemy to cold by another 50% reduction of their resistances. This is a massive more multiplier, and in most cases is going to lead to double damage, which is a very, very big deal when you're playing a minion build that has a lot of trouble scaling. This is going to be a big one, and you're definitely going to want to be using this to make sure your minions have the most amount of juice possible. Our final minion here as part of the army is, of course, the old Frenzy and Power Charge Spectres, which you can acquire through Desecrating in Act 7. They're called the Host and Carnage Chieftain, and they definitely provide a lot of damage as well, which is a really, really big benefit to your Phantasm army. So super duper awesome there. Of course, this isn't a guide, this is just a general kind of fill you in on my build here, but overall, a lot of the damage scaling does come from Abyss Jewels. So Abyss Jewels, what you're looking for is added cold damage, increased damage if you've used a minion skill recently, because our Arcanist Band is constantly triggering Flesh Offering, and you're also probably looking for minion speed or minion cast speed. It's very important to note that Phantasms are actually considered spellcasters, and their damage is spell damage. So a lot of your supports are going to be spell damage focused, which is very, very good to note, of course. Outside of Abyss Jewels, your general damage links, Triad Grip, and the chest piece, and also a ring, everything else is pretty much free reign. You can pick up resists where you need it, and it's going to be a pretty flexible build. Let's get into that weapon swap which I was talking about earlier. So you want to have a single target setup, which essentially has the Phantasms shooting one singular projectile, which has a 100% chance to pierce naturally, for massive, massive single target damage. We're also using Predator, which allows you to pinpoint a target, which is fantastic for invitations and targeting one Guardian down at a time. Overall, it's going to be a big more damage multiplier, and it's probably immune to the 3.15 nerfs, as it's a very, very weird and unique way to play with minions, and it's definitely got a big downside in that you need to target. However, it might get nerfed, and then this might get subbed out. But overall, it's a very strong single target setup, focused specifically only on single target abilities. When you look at the AoE setup though, it's a very different one. So you're going to need a very specific single target setup. Next up though, we have the AoE setup here, and you can see here that we have lesser multiple projectiles and faster projectiles, along with controlled destruction, minion damage, and summon Phantasm. So the main ones here, which you want to notice, are lesser multiple projectiles, which turn our one projectile into 3, which essentially makes our guys do massive amounts of AoE. But the main primary focus here is faster projectiles, an absolute staple for summon Phantasm in map clear scenarios. Without this, the targeting range of the Phantasms is incredibly small, with borderline melee being the comparison I would make. So faster projectiles effectively turns them into ranged turrets, and they're able to shoot multiple projectiles, and for the purpose of clearing maps, it's going to be a lot of damage, and you're going to be able to do Guardian maps and all sorts of stuff like that just fine, and then you're going to be able to weapon swap real quick into the single target setup, in which you can just jump in there and do massive damage, which is really, really good. Alright, So that pretty much covers the majority of the build of this one, which I'm thinking of starting. It's pretty much going to be, in my opinion, pretty okay after the nerfs, pending any changes to the Phantasm support gem, which are very, very impactful. But outside of that, I think this is a pretty good starter with a very, very smooth power curve into acquiring the Soulwrest staff. Now, disclaimer, this staff is a rare item. It's about on the rarity of a Call of the Brotherhood ring, and that means it is a fairly rare item for those of you guys who don't understand what that means. To give you guys some perspective, there were only 50 players with a Soulwrest last league on day 1. With thousands and thousands of players playing the game, that does mean that it's a reasonably rare item. So if you're worried about an item being expensive at league start or affected by inflation from other players playing it, this might be a concern that you may want to realize and kind of steer clear of this build. I'm personally more interested in the raw power of this build, and I'm willing to take a hit on how much this item would take just to pursue and use this build because I know it's very powerful, but it may be a massive wall in progression for you if you're not able to grind the currency to acquire this stuff. Now, let's talk about the power progression. So moving through acts and the story, this is a fantastic league starter. Minions are one of the best things to move through the story with, and I highly recommend checking out Tai Killer's Necromancer speedrun for a good reference point on how to do that. That's where I learned how to level Necromancers, and it was very, very successful for me in my past leagues as Necromancer as well. Moving into white and yellow tier maps, skeletons with the, I can't remember the name, what is it called? The thing basically, it basically turns the skeletons into an AoE. It's like a microwave. That's all I can say. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Someone will comment down below. I'm sure everyone will upvote it. Essentially, the skill which turns skeletons into an AoE, coupled with a fallen carrying golem for single target, and perhaps even dabbling in the new Reaper gem, will give you massive amounts of damage through white and yellow maps and really, really carry your map clear until you can afford a Soulwrest staff. Now, the Soulwrest staff used to be a Delve-specific drop. It is now a global drop, so there is a much more availability for it. But again, I can't stress this enough. It is a reasonably rare drop, and the entire build hinges completely on it. Everything else as a part of this build is incredibly common. Victaria's Influence, very, very common. Dryad Grip, incredibly common. Everything else is reasonably acquirable. The only other challenge being a Hungry Loop with Elemental Army and Feeding Frenzy in it is going to be the only other barrier you encounter between you and the endgame of Path of Exile on this build with things how they are right now. Acquiring good Abystrals is also going to have to be a priority of yours, but I am running with some fairly lackluster ones right now, but just getting damage on them is the priority. You're fairly tanky between block as well as a fairly large life pool on this build, and you also do need to get some clusters though as well. You can see here that we're using 2 mod minion clusters. They're nothing really to write home about. This one's an item level 49, meaning it's acquirable in the story, but getting the 2 mods you want may be, a few alterations or a few Chaos Orbs to get. But don't worry, Cluster Jewels aren't this big, spooky, scary thing, but they are mandatory for this build. You must have a Cluster Jewel with Blessed Rebirth on it, otherwise the build does not function. So yeah, Cluster Jewels, definitely very, very important. Won't be too expensive in my opinion, as you are able to acquire these very early on in the story. As long as you go for low item level ones, they're going to be all good. But overall, I think that Summon Phantasm, and by extension Soulwrest, is an incredibly powerful build, and it's definitely one that maybe you guys should consider if you're not scared off by the rarity of the Soulwrest staff. So with that said, guys, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I'll probably be doing an update on this one if I decide to pick it as my league starter, but I wanted to get this out early because, there's not much time left, and patch notes release tomorrow, and we really do need to start getting going on what we're all playing. So with that said, guys, hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.